Hey guys, what's going on? It's Eli, back with another review video, and continuing on, of course, with me reviewing some of my all-time favorite films. And that's right, guys, you read the title, and you know what I'm reviewing next. And as was clearly teased in the last review video, yeah, obviously, you must have figured out and you knew what I was talking about, right? I'm quite good at, with what I describe and such, but okay. So, that's right, guys. I gotta say, I feel like that this one film about an alien would have to be one of my top favorite films. And for that matter, one of my top favorite films centering on aliens and such. In that territory where you've got humans tangling with aliens and all that. And in the case of this one film, well, a few human characters trying to help out one extraterrestrial and to avoid from those that are going after the alien and all that, and quite similar to, say, E.T. and such. Yeah, I mean, even E.T. Having some influence on this one film about an extraterrestrial whom definitely has a potty mouth, and he's unlike any other alien, and he kind of acts like a human and such, his attitude and all that. And just, finds it annoying, why do you think that I want to conquer or vaporize you and such, that stuff. Yeah. And the fact that, two hilarious British comedics that wrote and starred and, all the above. They brought this film to life, and especially since they were best known for doing the Cornetto trilogy and other various projects outside of the Cornetto trilogy that they worked on, and this being one of them, of course. Yeah. And, I would say this is probably one of my top favorites to come from both the great talents of Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. Yep, we all love those two guys. And whenever they collaborate and such, they're always so funny when they get together and all that, with whatever movie they're doing. But yes, guys, I am now reviewing from 2011, Paul. Yes, Paul, from Nick Frost, Simon Pegg, and Universal. Yep. So, the first things I have to say about Paul itself, well, I remember back when this movie came out, I remember seeing the promos, and maybe when my family and I, we went to go see any movie at our local movie theater, I want to say there was a trailer shown for Paul, but I most prominently remember seeing the advertisements and promos on TV, so yeah. And at that time, I wasn't able to see this, yeah. But, of course, very later on, when I finally got around to watching this, well, the first time I ever watched it, I just fell in love with it instantly, yeah. And then eventually my mom checked it out, and she thought it was entertaining too, because when I told her that I was watching Paul for the first time, and I told her that, oh yeah, this is great, then when she checked it out, yep, she couldn't agree more. And yeah, and of course, having done a rewatch of this, and here I am now doing my review, and this time I watched the unrated version, and I'd say, because usually I always, I stick and go for some films that have director's cuts to them and all that, say the Harry Potter films or the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. Some of those are my preferred versions, as well as Rango and all of that. You get what I'm saying? So the same now goes for Paul. The unrated version is, my preferred version. But yeah, just overall, for what Paul has to offer, being unlike any other movie we had seen about extraterrestrials, again, best example, and also straight from Universal, E.T., with what E.T. had to offer, and various other, movie or even, say, TV materials that had to do with aliens and such, hey, on TV, we had Alf, or a bunch of others that, Nick Frost and Simon Pegg cited, and when it came to them developing and working on Paul and such, with what those two specifically said, and if you know. Yeah, this being so entertaining, hilarious, of course, and the fact, of course, you've got Seth Rogen as the voice of Paul himself, and, How is it not funny and entertaining? You have a movie where you have Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, teaming up with an alien voiced by Rogan. Come on, that's pure gold right there. And a bunch of other great talents that are part of this too, and until I mention them. And all the funniest jokes and gags and, references to pop culture and such, especially with, science fiction, aliens and all that. And of course, Paul, being well aware of that stuff and, for how much long he's been on Earth and during the timeline of this movie. And, it turns out that Paul had some big influence on all of the pop culture stuff in the realm of science fiction, according to the movie itself. And with this being like a road trip film, because, our two main protagonists, played by Simon and Nick, they're driving in an RV, and when they cross paths with Paul and the journey that where they would proceed, and the addition of Paul, and all the various other characters, some that are on their tail to go after Paul specifically, and a few other characters that would, one of them specifically, that would join alongside with our main three characters on the RV trip, and the various locations they go to, and how they would start to connect, and, the chemistry that they would have and such. Just everything that Paul had to offer was excellent. Yeah. I love Paul, and I'm sure the same would go for some of you. If any of you have seen Paul, and if you enjoyed as well. Alright, so with the first things I've had to say about Paul done and out of the way, now, as always, for me, read the description / the story. For the past 60 years, a wisecracking alien named Paul has resided at a top-secret military base in America's UFO heartland. When Paul decides that he has had enough of Earth, he escapes from the compound and hops on the first handy vehicle, a rented RV manned by two British sci-fi nerds named Graham and Clive, with federal agents and the father of an accidental kidnapped victim on their tail. The two hatch a crazy plan to help Paul return to his spaceship. Alright, now with reading the description / the story done and out of the way, as I sometimes do, talk about some background and such, and it's, pretty interesting with how the background, began and when this film was in development. Well, the concept for, Paul originated when both Pegg and Frost were in the middle of working on Shaun of the Dead back in 2003. And to develop the script, they embarked on a road trip across the U.S., visiting Nevada's UFO hotspots, which influenced scenes in the movie. And if you noticed and realized, and the film would be greenlit and with the budget of roughly $40 million. That's not bad. Well, besides, the fact, of course, that Paul had to be, our main character, our title character had to be CG, that's all there was to it. Yeah, the only big CG thing we had. But granted, we would get some more towards the end of the film, but yeah, of course, until I get there. But also, we had some action and explosions and all that, so there you go. And when it came to the making of Paul and the character and visual effects, well, the CG character of Paul was created by Double Negative, which is short for DNEG, okay? And of course, Seth, he would provide the voice of our title character, and I did check it out because even in the trivia that ILM, they were involved in the making of Paul and with bringing Paul to life and such, so I know what I read, so yeah. And also, not to mention that this would be Universal's first film where, in a live-action film, you have a CG character whom has a potty mouth and such. And to think that this film came out just 1 year before another biggie for Universal, where you had a CG character who has such a foul potty mouth, and that, of course, being Ted. So there you go. So where it all began, it was thanks to Paul. Oh gosh, could you imagine if you would have both Paul and Ted hanging out and such? I'm sure they would get along, and they they share a few things in common, right? Anyways, all right, but yeah, and also like there's one specific cameo that is in this movie, but until I mention him, yeah. But anyways, and also because, like, when they were working on Shaun of the Dead, because they had this drawing of an alien giving the finger, and, you know, it said Paul and FBI. He had, like, a shirt that said FBI, and, yeah, that's another thing where it would first begin, you know, bringing Paul to life and such. And, you know, even though it would take a while for Simon and Nick to get this movie underway, and also on account they had various other projects they were doing. Some where they were working together, and others that they were just doing solo, just each of them. Because, yeah, I mean, doing the next installment in the Cornetto trilogy, you know, Hot Fuzz, and also, like, on account of Simon Pegg, well, and even, like, 2 years before Paul, he was in the first installment in the Star Trek Kelvin timeline. You know, just, yeah. Okay, so, yeah. So that's it on background. So, all right, without further ado, let us now dive in / break down the film itself. Shall we begin? All right. So, basically, how the film starts off, well, basically, like, in the late 1940s, this little girl would have an encounter with something that is coming from the sky, a bright glowing light, and when she lets her dog out to, you know, go potty and such. And by the way, the little girl's dog is named Paul, so, yeah. So our main protagonist, the title character, how he got his name Paul would be from that dog, and, well, unfortunately, with what crashed, it crashed right on top of poor Paul. Just, oh my gosh. That's a shame. But yeah, and it's obvious that that's a spaceship that has crashed, and we would get our title of the film and such. Then, fast forward many years later in 2009, that's the time and setting for this movie, Graham Willie and Clive Gollins, being played by each Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. Simon plays Graham, and Nick plays Clive, and whom are two English comic book nerds, and they're best friends, and they have traveled to America to attend to the annual Comic-Con convention to San Diego, of course. It's in San Diego, the best well-known Comic-Con, being in San Diego. And afterwards, the two would take a road trip in their rented RV to visit all sites of major extraterrestrial importance in the Southwest USA. And, by the way, because the time they were spending at Comic-Con, all the various things they were doing, you know, like a bit of a montage that we would see, like them checking out the gals that are dressed up as Princess Leia in the slave outfit. Clive, on the other hand, he's checking out a smaller woman whom is dressed as an Ewok. Well, I mean, that's his business, and if he finds someone like that attractive, and, you know, and they would also meet a famous science fiction author and all that, writing various science fiction books. His name is Adam Shadowchild, and Adam being played by Jeffrey Tambor. Yep, Jeffrey Tambor, with how much we get of him in this movie, well, of course, he doesn't disappoint. You know, such a great, amusing actor and such, you know. And say what you will about him, but still, you know, no denying that he's funny and is a good actor and such. And, you know, all the various things that he wrote in his books and such, which, well, both Clive and Willie, they know about and such. Very interesting titles and all that. Even Clive, he's a writer himself, and when mentioning it to, you know, to Adam, and by showing him a sample of it, like the cover having an alien with 3 breasts and such, which, you know, he digs. Every other character, when it's mentioned, like, you know, they dig it, finding it awesome. An alien with 3 breasts. I mean, granted, we've seen that kind of thing before. Remember Star Trek V? Yeah, you know. Anyways, but that's another story. I mean, it's true, and best example. But getting back on point, and by the way, because there's a quote that Adam would have. It's, you have to spin a good yarn before you can weave a great dream. Yeah, that's a good quote right there, and being inspirational and all that, from Adam Shadowchild. But as I mentioned, they would rent an RV, and at one point they're staying at a hotel after their day at Comic-Con. However, they were supposed to have, 2 separate beds, but they only got a room where it had 1 bed, and oftentimes in this movie, they would be mistaken as gay men, but, they would make it very clear they're just best friends, okay? God. Anyways, so, by the next day, they would rent the RV, and like I said, they would visit all the major extraterrestrial importance in the southwest of the USA. And yeah, at one stop in Arizona, Willie and Clive, they would visit the Little Alien. Yeah, it's spelled a little different, but still, alien. And where 2 hunters confront them. Well, first confronting Graham, because, they were coming in, they told a joke and such, and Graham just thought he would just, laugh and join in, but yeah, it just gets awkward and a bit uncomfortable and not really good. Also, at the Little Alien, because the lady that works at the place is Pat Stevens, and Pat Stevens being played by another good funny talent in this film, Jane Lynch. Yeah, and with how much we get of Jane Lynch in this, and even when they mention to Pat Stevens about Adam Shadowchild and the books and all that he wrote, and not really ringing a bell to Pat. And even say when, one of them would order a special drink that's alien themed and all that, but, overall, it just gets out of hand, and, they both would feel uncomfortable, especially Graham feeling uncomfortable, towards those 2 hunters, and, they, and even, say, the 2 hunters, they first assumed that they might be homosexual, but, again, they're not, as they would explain various times. And in a hurried leave, well, when they get into their RV, Clive, whom is taking the wheel, he would accidentally reverse the RV into the hunter's truck, yep, leaving a huge dent. Yeah, this can only go so well later on, because it's obvious we're going to see those 2 hunters very later on. And by the way, because those 2 hunters, named Gus and Jack, Gus being played by, well, both of them being played by 2 other great funny talents. Gus played by David Kushner, yeah, and Jake played by Jess Plemons, yeah. And with how much we get of them, well, of course, they don't disappoint either. And we know for sure that, we're going to be seeing them a little later. But later that evening, well, both of them would see behind them some headlights racing up behind them, and they assume it's the hunters. They assume that they're chasing after them and all that. And even when they let the car pass, it's not the truck, no, but it is a black vehicle. But then at one point, the car just veers out of, loses control and crashes and tumbles, and both Graham and Clive, they would go to investigate the crash, and that's where they would meet. And even when one of them was about to call the police, you hear a voice telling them that, yeah, put the phone down, don't call anybody. They would, for the first time, cross paths with the alien himself, our main titled character, Paul, being voiced by Seth Rogen. Yep. And whom is in desperate need of their help and such. And just the way they react, I mean, of course they're shocked, and in the case of Clive, well, he just laughs, then he faints. But luckily Graham didn't faint, and although shocked by the appearance of Paul, Graham would agree to help Paul, to help out with his situation and such, give him a ride. And with what Paul specifically explains, and even when, yeah, Graham does ask, are you going to probe me and all that? Oh my gosh, why the hell is everybody thinking I want to do that and all that? Just yeah. And of course, it doesn't take too long for Paul to start to swear a good chunk, Again, just having such a potty mouth, this alien, I tell you. But anyways, so they would have to carry, you know, the unconscious Clive back into the RV, and thus they would proceed on their destination. Yep, change of plans for Graham and Clive. However, when Clive regains consciousness, yeah, he's not happy. He's not happy about the idea. Even like say when Clive, he tried to strangle Paul twice, and he was even speaking Klingon. Paul knew exactly what he was saying, yeah, in Klingon language. And to speed things up some, because, yeah, then we would be introduced a little later by a man named Zoil. Yeah. And Zoil being played by another hilarious talent, Jason Bateman. Yeah, good old Jason Bateman, a.k.a. the voice of Nick Wilde. And, you know, of course, this was before he would go on to voice Nick Wilde. And Zoil, whom is a shady government agent, he would arrive at the site of the crashed vehicle, and he would inform his mysterious female superior over the radio about the whole situation, and with the mentioning of Paul. Yeah, they know about Paul. They know he's escaped, and when Paul did mention that to Clive and Graham, that he escaped, and yeah, by this point, he's had enough with Earth, and he wants to get the heck off planet Earth and such. And she would recommend to Zoil by using local law enforcement as backup. However, Zoil then would recruit two inept, if I said that right, FBI agents, and those being Haggard and O'Reilly. Haggard being played by yet another hilarious talent, Bill Hader, and yet another there's so many great comedic, funny, entertaining cast members in this film. Yeah. And O'Reilly, Joe Lo Truggello. Truggello, if I said that right, but again, you know me sometimes. Yeah. Oh man, because both Haggard and O'Reilly, you know, the chemistry that they have, and unbeknownst to them for a while, they don't know what they find themselves into yet. But they have some funny moments. I mean, Bill's character being kind of the serious one at times, while O'Reilly, because, yeah, being serious and all that, and on account of his job, well, he just can't help himself when it comes to anything science fiction related and geeking out and such. Yeah, and by the way, because every single cast member in this film, just to go ahead and say it, because, yeah, get out of the way, they were all fantastic. You know, from Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, Kristen Wiig, and, yeah, Bill Hader, Jason Bateman, Jane Lynch, everybody else, and that would show up very later on, especially one big cast member whom, you know, who plays the mysterious female superior. Yeah, when she appears, oh yeah, with how much we get of her on screen, of course she doesn't disappoint, and even like her being no stranger to anything when it comes to science fiction, and in the case of aliens. Yeah, I mean, she's kicked alien butts before, and she was almost about to, but until I mention her, I won't say her name yet, but you know by now, but still, I just want to do so, just for the fun of it. Anyways. So, yeah, overall, Zoil would recruit those two FBI agents to aid in his mission without telling them the nature of their target. Yeah, because like I said, they have no idea what they're getting themselves into on account of Zoil. Yeah. Later on, Graham and Clive and Paul would pull into a motor park run by Ruth Buggs, and this is where Kristen Wiig steps in. Yep. And whom is a creationist Christian. Yeah. And her abusive and controlling father, Moses, being played by John Carroll Lynch, you know, because, I mean, she runs the place, but so does her father, technically. And by the way, because, you know, she has, like, her glasses, like, one has a black spot because, like, something to do with her eye, just, yeah, and we learn about that later on. And it doesn't take too long when, like, say, you know, Graham would just fall in love instantly. Love at first sight for Graham when he looks at the beautiful face of Ruth. Yeah. But yeah, so our trio would then bond around their camp grill, And Paul would reveal that ever since he was captured by the government, he had been advising them in all manner of scientific and psychological achievements, including, and this is where we get a really big cameo in this film, Steven Spielberg. Yeah. He even gave Steven Spielberg the idea for E.T. Yeah, it's thanks to Paul that E.T. exists. But that only exists in the movie. Yeah. And by the way, because when we cut to that, and it's set in the early 1980s, when Paul had a radio communication talk with Spielberg about, yeah, coming up with the idea of E.T. Well, Paul was in a warehouse with boxes, bearing a clear resemblance and all that to Indiana Jones. You know, at the very end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, then when it came to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Nice detail there. Yeah. And, yeah, even like, say, I think it'd be obvious because that warehouse we see at the very end of Raiders of the Lost Ark being the same, like, warehouse, right? Because why wouldn't it be? You know, that we would come to at the very start of Crystal Skull. Yeah. And where, of course, the Ark of the Covenant resides, but other various things, of course, including the Crystal Skull of the Interdimensional. God, makes you wonder what Paul thought of that. Because, I mean, the time and setting of Paul being set in 2009, well, you know, Crystal Skull came out a year before the time and setting of this, so, yeah. It, again, just makes you wonder, what did Paul think about the whole thing of interdimensional beings in the fourth installment of Indiana Jones? And, I don't know, maybe that's for you guys to figure out. For us to figure out, that is. Yeah. But that was a really awesome cameo. And not seeing Spielberg on screen, but just hearing his voice. And as far as I recall, reading and all that of the making of Paul and such, like, yeah, even, like, Spielberg got a kick out of it. And even when, like, they approached Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, they approached Spielberg with what they were coming up with and such. Yeah. And if you know about that, too. Anyways. So again, you know, he gave Spielberg the idea for E.T., and he also invented the character of Fox Mulder, if I said the last name right, but yeah. However, he discovered that he had outlived his usefulness, and as a receptacle, if you know me sometimes, just having trouble saying that word, of acknowledge, and the government, yeah. Well, it was now intended to surgically remove Paul's brain in an attempt to harness his abilities. Ugh, yeah, like Paul's gonna let that happen. And yeah, with the help of a friend inside Area 51. Whom is this friend, I wonder? Well, I assume we're gonna see him later on. Paul managed to send an SOS to his home planet, and thus his people are now en route to pick him up at a specific location. Yeah. And with the government being pushed up the schedule for Paul's surgery, and however prompting his rapid escape and such, yeah. And, you know, slowly but surely, our trio would start to bond and such, even when they're dancing to a song that's playing. And at one point, Ruth caught a glimpse of our three main characters dancing, because we only see them by their legs, you know, because they're on the other side of the RV. And Ruth getting a quick glimpse, almost, on the third person that's with the two that she met earlier, noticing, like, the way the legs look, but didn't manage to get a good look when her father called her in and such. Yeah. But by the next morning, Paul would inadvertently reveal himself to Ruth because, well, at some point, you know, things would get out of hand when, you know, talking about creation, God, and all that, and, you know, both Clive and Graham, like, what their opinion is, because, you know, of evolution, science, and all that, with what they specifically say. And Paul, whom is in the bathroom, because he can hear this, and he makes a couple of comments that, yeah, Ruth can hear, and just gets out of hand, then Paul would come out revealing himself, and, like, you know, what do you make of me? And, yeah, Ruth would collapse. And that's when, you know, unintentionally, they they are forced to kidnap her because, you know, she is a witness. She saw Paul, and they make a hasty escape. Yep. And even, like, when Paul had to collect Clive's identity and all that, his photo ID and such, and by turning himself invisible, because, yeah, he can do this thing where he can camouflage, but not for very long, just, yeah. And he even has to take his pants off, and, you know, there are times where they can literally see his alien penis. I assume it just looks like a normal wiener. I don't know, anyways. Probably so. But, back on point. Well, even, like, say, Ruth's father, he too would then notice Paul, and when he turned uninvisible, you know, mourning, and just, like, you know, her dad just freaked out, and then he tries to shoot Paul and all that, but yeah, again, they managed to escape. Then, Paul would shatter Ruth's faith by sharing his knowledge of the universe via telepathic. Yep, because by, you know, putting his hand on her face, you know, oh, F this, like, you know, just getting her to shut up and all that, and all these quick shots we get. And, yeah, at first, horrified, Ruth suddenly becomes eager to sin, and which her father had raised her to fear doing and such. And she, you know, she would then instantly doesn't trust Paul. But, you know, he heals her eye, and with the condition that she has since she was a little kid, and Paul managed to have a lucky guess on what it was and such that, you know, she had. So she would manage to heal her eye, and, yeah, because she had been blind since the age of 4, that's right. And yeah, I mean, it seems like everything's good now between, you know, Paul and Ruth. Even, like, before he healed her eye, he apologized to her and all that. And, you know, yes, that's great to see. And now Ruth joining alongside our trio. And not to mention, because, you know, now that her eye is healed, you know, looking beautiful, of course. Even when she unveils her eye to Clive and Graham, they're just like, oh my god, and, you know, all Paul can do is smile. That's great to see. Yeah, and that was good on Paul, definitely. Oh, and by the way, because other things that happen in this movie, of course, I have to acknowledge, and they happen early on. Well, because, like, when Clive and Graham, after they picked up and, you know, took in Paul and such, well, they would be greeted by those 2 FBI agents. They would be pulled over because traffic's being held up some, and they would O'Reilly would investigate through their RV, and O'Reilly noticing a couple of science fiction-y stuff, and on account that they met Adam, Shadow Child at Comic-Con and such, and O'Reilly geeking out, and even, like, you know, Bill Hader's character has no clue on whom that guy is, and even when they explain to them about the novels that Adam wrote, and then, like, we would get a funny scene where those 2 guys, the FBI agents, they're playing hide and seek, and O'Reilly is, like, being the one to seek, while Bill Hader's character hides and such. Yeah, Haggard. And then when, like, Zol shows up, because he's not satisfied, you know? He's got to deal with 2 FBI agent idiots, basically. And also a moment where Clive and Graham, they stopped at a rest stop and collecting some supplies, and even Paul asked for Reese's Pieces, yeah. And then there's a moment where, you know, in the gas station, and the gas station attendant being played by Joe Berryman, and a state trooper being played by Mark Syverson, if I even said that right, you know, they both feel a bit intimidated by the state trooper, and when they explain that they're from the UK and all that, yeah, but luckily everything turned out to be okay and such, and by getting their supplies at the convenience store and such, at the gas station, just, yeah. And then there would also be a moment where, yeah, this was pretty funny, they accidentally, in the RV, hit a bird, and the bird already dead. Paul also managing to do this thing where he can bring something back to life, yep, using his alien abilities and, yep, just bringing the bird back to life. And once it's brought back to life, it's a nice moment, but Paul eating the bird. Because, apparently he wasn't going to eat it while it was dead. Okay, I mean, I can understand on account of Paul, but anyways. Well, I mean, I don't know, because in the case of him, his alien species in this movie, just not eating anything that is dead. That's great. And right after that, with the bird thing, and while they're still on the road, Graham is actually taking the time to sketch and draw Paul, and it would be brought up because if Paul had ever, because with what he did with the bird, bringing the bird back to life, Graham asks Paul if he ever tried that with a human, and Paul specifically says that's a whole different, ball game and such, with what he specifically says. And, yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell, but I think it's obvious at some point that will more than likely happen, doing that on a human and such. Anyways. And a few other things that happen, and before I continue on point, because, yeah, I mean, a moment where Graham and Ruth, they would get into a heated argument, and this is before her other eye would be cured and such, and talking about Paul and all that. And a moment, while that's going on, a moment between Clive and Paul would realize with what Clive is specifically saying that, Clive felt jealous and all that. Because, Clive, he really wanted this to be special with what he and Graham were doing before, Paul stepped in, then Ruth, and, Clive seeing his best friend, having a good time and good communications with an alien, and then finding a girl and such. But, Paul assuring Clive and with what he specifically says, and, because, think about it, both of them having encountered an extraterrestrial and all that, and even, Paul not caring if, say, Clive had, pissed his pants and such, because, yeah, when he was first terrified of the sight of Paul and all that. And that's another thing, because Zol would, realize something when it came to the two FBI agents, Haggard and O'Reilly, mentioning about a pair of pants with stained piss and such, and yeah, that would give Zol a good idea, and on account of Paul and such, with what specifically happens. But yeah, I mean, with what was going on in that sequence between Ruth and Graham, and with Clive and Paul, that was a really great scene, right? And also, Paul, after he shared knowledge with Ruth, he would do the same to Graham. Then he would do it again to Clive. Just yeah, and it takes a toll on Paul. Just oh, jeez, what I'm saying, very exhausting and all that. Takes out the energy from him. All right, but continuing and getting back on point, because yeah, on account of Zol, Haggard, and O'Reilly, they would talk with Ruth's father, and he claims that his daughter was abducted by, as he calls, a demon, and Haggard would then find a drawing of Paul that was accidentally left behind that Graham drew. Because, yeah, where basically it's kind of like Paul giving the finger, but with how many fingers he has, F you. And he would then become suspicious, Haggard, becomes suspicious of Zol's motives, especially after, he would accidentally overhear Zol reporting to his mysterious supervisor over the radio. And then Graham and Clive and Ruth and Paul, they would stop at a restaurant. And even right before that, because Ruth was starting to, get into the same territory as our trio, having a potty mouth and such. But she's kind of got to work on it some, saying things like dick mouth or all that jazz, you know what I'm saying? Just, yeah. But overall, they would stop at a restaurant and all that, get some food, and, well, while they're there, they would encounter the same pair of hunters from earlier. Yeah, obviously, we were going to see them a little later, because, yeah, while they're settling in the restaurant, and at one point, Ruth was going to make a phone call to her dad. Well, actually, he happens to be there in the restaurant. He passed by her, didn't realize, and didn't see her behind him. And when Ruth would make the phone call to her dad, it would be picked up up by Zoll, Haggard, and O'Reilly. And, well, Ruth doing her very best not to say anything. And even when O'Reilly and Haggard, they're, you know, getting some information, all that, with their tech and all that, and O'Reilly can't keep his mouth shut with what he specifically says, blowing their cover, O'Reilly, and yeah, ultimately Ruth would hang up the phone and such. Even a couple of, you know, insults that O'Reilly would say on account of Ruth, yeah. But yeah, then she would then encounter the two hunters. They want to have some fun with her, but, you know, she rightfully so kicked them in the crotches, and then she would make her way back to Graham and Clive, and when the hunters recognize Clive and Graham, like, yeah, they're now gonna kick their butts and such. And when they try to, then a brawl happens in the restaurant, and these country musicians, they would start to play their music faster on account of the brawl, and Ruth's dad noticing too, and just like, yeah, and he would get knocked out as well. And when they're making their way back to the RV, well, the two hunters, they're right on their tail, and even when Clive tried to confront them, he got knocked out by those two hunters. But then when Paul stepped out of the RV, opening the door and calling out to the hunters, it's probing time. Well, they pass out too, they faint, fall behind their backs, just, yeah. Good on Paul, yeah, he saved their skins. So, yeah, they would make their way out of there, and then a little later, well, Zoll, Haggard, and O'Reilly, they would show up to the restaurant with what happened, and all that the deputies can specifically say is that there was a brawl fight and all that. And then when they would turn their attention to the hunters, they're not really getting anything out of them. However, Haggard, whom took that drawing of Paul, he would show it to the two hunters, and they start to freak out. Yep, there we go. Now, yeah, Haggard managed to get something out of those two hunters. But, yeah, so it's a good thing still so far with our four main characters managing to avoid and dodge, you know, from the FBI and such. And also, like, yeah, they would stop at another RV park and such, you know, only an idiot would do so, and Paul pointing out that they are the idiots. Well, I mean, not in a stupid way or anything like that, just, you know. So, later that same evening, they would be out of the RV and such after they parked it, and they would make a campfire, and most prominently during the sequence, Paul would talk about when he first arrived on Earth, and as we saw at the start of the film, in the late 1940s, where he landed in Moorcroft, Wyoming, yeah, and where he, you know, because he crashed it on Earth in his ship and accidentally killing the dog named Paul, and his encounter with the little girl named Tara. Yeah, and, you know, he knew Tara and such, and unfortunately when, you know, he and Tara no longer saw each other, he never got a chance to apologize to her, and apparently because, you know, Tara, she went through quite a lot, and when it would be talked about some more and such, because, yeah, I think it would be obvious that we would see Tara again after all these years, and in the time and setting of this movie. And by the way, because, to mention some of the other cast members, because, yeah, well, young Tara, because young Tara was, yeah, I believe, like, probably she must have been uncredited or something, I don't know, but, yeah, but of course, yeah, we're gonna see an older Tara, yeah, her full name being Tara Walton, yeah, that's right, okay, oh, okay, yeah, she's right up there, like, at the very top of the cast, okay, not uncredited, of course, yeah, young Tara being played by Mia Stallard, yeah, I think I said that right, yeah, so, because we saw young Tara at the start of the film, so there we go, then, like, during the campfire, because there would be a moment where, to best put it this, you know, Ruth would get high and such, yeah, and then they would go to sleep and all that, but by the next morning, and Paul, he woke up Clive and such, Ruth is missing, and apparently she left a note saying that she was making her way back to the RV and such, yep, and where we would see her still sleeping in the RV. And to still speed things up some, because, yeah, actually, because well, Ruth, she took the RV back at the RV park, basically. And they would then find themselves in a small town. And Paul, I mean, he can't stay invisible that long. So that's when Graham and Clive, they would disguise Paul in, like, cowboy getup and such, sunglasses and all that. Oh, it's so funny. And, yeah, because making their way through the small town, they are drawing a crowd because they're looking at them and such. And by this point, Zol has shown up at the RV park, starts knocking on each and every RV vehicle, asking some questions and all that, and up to when he would come face to face with Ruth. However, he does not recognize Ruth because on account that, yeah, most prominently, she was wearing those glasses, one of the lenses covered entirely black. So, yeah. And luckily, with answering questions from Zol and all that, well, he doesn't suspect anything, and yeah, whew, thank goodness for that. At one point, Clive and Paul, they would make their way inside of a comic book shop, and Clive is especially intrigued by a sword. I mean, earlier in the film and when they went to Comic-Con, he was intrigued by a sword and the fact that the sword costs so many money, just golly. But he ultimately would get the swords and such. And, well, yeah, and Graham, he would make his way back to the RV park, and, Jenks, both Ruth and Graham would say, "You won't believe what just happened," and all that. And while Paul is looking at some of the comic books and such, and while Clive is busy with the sword and all that, and the comic book store clerk being played by J. Todd Anderson, well, again, while Paul's looking through the comic books and such, there's one boy whom is dressed up as Luke Skywalker. Luke's get-up in A New Hope, from the Homestead. A boy by the name of Keith Nash, played by young Brett Michael Jones, whom is both terrified but not terrified of Paul's presence, and asking Paul if he is the alien in this one comic book cover and such. And the interactions that both Paul and Keith would have, yeah, goes pretty well. And, Keith's not saying a word and such, just finding it awesome to interact with an alien and such. But, not only that, sure enough, Haggard and O'Reilly would find themselves in the small town, and O'Reilly would just be intrigued by the comic shop and just taking a quick look, and Haggard, he'd like to proceed on and just, knocking on the window to tell O'Reilly to finish up and such. And O'Reilly, in the comic book shop, would accidentally encounter Paul, because when Paul said goodbye to Keith, he said goodbye taking off his cowboy hat and such, he froze when O'Reilly stepped in. And also, because this was brought up earlier on account of Haggard and O'Reilly alien balls and such, because Paul's balls, with what they specifically say. And, well, O'Reilly, checking out the statue, but even though it's not an alien statue in cowboy getup, he would go for Paul's crotch, and Paul, oh yeah, there's no way he can no longer stay still as a statue. Take your damn hand out of my crotch and such. What he specifically says, and O'Reilly freaks out and calling out to Haggard to come in because, he found the alien. But, yeah, good thing on Clive. He was quick enough to put on an alien mask, but it doesn't take too long for Haggard to notice Paul, and that's when both Clive and Haggard, they would make a run out of the comic book shop. A few people in the small town would notice Paul, whom is butt naked, and, luckily, Graham and Ruth would show up in the RV, and they would hop on, but also, yeah, not to mention that Ruth's dad is also present once again, because earlier and at the restaurant, he was arrested at one point, but then he got out, so he too being present in the small town. And, again, they would manage to escape and all that. And contrary to his orders, however, the two FBI agents would follow Zol in the same direction because, they now know what they're dealing with an alien and such. And even like Haggard, he's almost had it up to here. He has, with Zol and such. But with what would happen next a little later, we're getting there. Okay, but still speeding things up some, because, yeah. At one point, Clive and Graham, they have to get some fireworks, and on account that, yeah, to signal, Paul's people and where they're gonna be at and such, yeah. And unfortunately, with how much these specific fireworks cost, well, they're unable to buy it, so they quickly steal it and such. And it would be reported about, two British nerds who stole some fireworks and such. And yeah, with the FBI agents being aware of this and all that, as well as Ruth's father, because, early on he did overhear about Paul and with his daughter and all that, and yeah, Ruth's dad was going to take it upon himself to handle the situation himself, even though it was out of his league and such. But anyways, so they would steal the fireworks, and at one point, Paul tells them to make one stop where, yeah, we see this farmhouse, and this is where, yeah, we would see Tara after all these years, having grown up and such. And, well, whom plays Tara by this point? Yeah, like, older Tara is Blythe Danner, another good talent in this film, and yeah, really good actress, and with what else we've seen her in, and yeah, Paul basically wanting to be there because, yeah, to apologize to Tara and such. And because, even after she spent a life being ridiculed and being, poked fun at, for what she had saw and such, being a mockery and all that, a laughingstock. And Tara, she seems grateful to see Paul simply existing. Yeah, that's what matters. And she would then turn her gas cooker on to make tea and such, and when Ruth was the one that first suggested on making tea, but, Tara will take it from here. And even Paul, surprising Tara with a teddy bear that she once had, and it was in Paul's possession and all that. Yeah. And also, also Paul apologizing for accidentally killing her dog and such. Just, yeah, all the crazy things that she went through throughout her life and such. Just completely hell. Yeah. However, after all that, a nice moment and such, it would all be interrupted by Haggard and O'Reilly on one side of the house and Zoll on the other. Yep, because they, at the same time, showed up, and Zoll was not expecting them to show up, and Haggard and O'Reilly, one of them would throw a smoke bomb and such, and they would just take it upon themselves to bring in Paul. But obviously, yeah, with how they're handling this situation, completely different in the case of Zoll. And, yeah, because as the crew escape and they would drive off, they would confront O'Reilly and Haggard, and Zoll, well, he would be confronted by Paul, like, by touching his head and such, making him pass out. And because the gas cooker was put on, fire is left off and such, and on account of the smoke bomb and all that, and with what O'Reilly's doing inside of the house, ultimately, this would cause Tara's house to be blown up, and O'Reilly being killed and engulfed in the explosion. Yeah, that's the end and demise of O'Reilly. Yeah. However, Zoll and Haggard, they managed to escape, and Haggard, well, he's hot on their trail, just, right behind them. And also Ruth's dad, who showed up too, wanting to bring back his daughter with him, but, good riddance to him, and with what Ruth says. So they just make a run for it, and Haggard, confronting Ruth's dad, like, he should not be involved in this, even trying to shoot him down, like, man, Haggard's really going at it, he's had it up to here, and now he's taking control, and when he gets in contact with the woman supervisor and all that had been in connections with Zoll. Yep, and even, she doesn't care whom is in charge. Yeah, just all that matters is bringing in Paul. So, yeah, a car chase and pursue, but ultimately, and when Haggard's trying to shoot them down, Paul would point out to Haggard to keep his eyes on the road, and even when Haggard was this close to shoot Paul, and quoting a line from Jaws, "Smile, you son of a bitch," yeah, that's where Paul then tells him to keep his eyes on the road, and he sees that he's about to fall down the edge of a cliff, and yeah, he would do so. Even the Wilhelm scream would be let out by Haggard. And yeah, the car falls, and well, I think by this point he'd be dead as the car fell by that long fall. Yeah, but that's not enough. The car explodes. So yep, that's the end and demise of Haggard right there. Poor Haggard. But, I mean, because who'd have thought that those two out-of-control FBI agents, what would come to them in the end? Yeah, just, good riddance to them, I guess. Oh, and also, when Tara, yeah, she did tag along with our four main characters, she looks back at her homestead and like, my weed! Yeah, but okay, and by this point, because after Haggard and O'Reilly met their demise, well, now Zoll is once again in hot pursuit. However, the woman herself on the radio, yeah, she's had it up to here, and now she's gonna take care of it herself, and the fact that, she didn't want to on account that she was going to meet with the government and such, bad timing, but yeah, she's got to do it herself. But Zoll, he's going to do it. He doesn't care by this point, even shooting the radio. Yeah, because apparently he's had enough with the woman herself on the radio frequency. So yeah, he would then pursue them, and Paul, yeah, and, he'll have Paul within the hour and such. So, yeah, a little later on, when Paul, Graham, Clive, Ruth, and Tara arrive at the reservoirs, I think I'm saying it right, yeah, they would set off a single firework and wait, yeah, but, I mean, multiple fireworks would then shoot up in the sky. And eventually, what would come their way? Eerie orange lights that show up over the surrounding trees and where a mountain is. And also by this point, Zoll, he's very close by and making his way through the woods. He's got a gun loaded, and he can see the orange lights there too, and like, oh, I don't think so, says Zoll. Well, whom could it be specifically? Well, that's when even Paul, he too notices something when it gets closer. Wait a minute, says Paul. It's a chopper. A chopper shows up, and we get the ultimate reveal of the main antagonist whom was trying to bring back Paul in, being referred to as the big guy. And the big guy, as she's called, being none other than good old Sigourney Weaver. Yeah. And I'm sure as though for all of us, we knew it was her. And knowing the voice, the sound of her voice, right? Yeah. So, oh man, because Sigourney's appearance in this movie is so great. And also, it's funny because the fact that we've seen her be the heroine and taking on aliens, well, it's the opposite in this. She's the main antagonist going after the alien whom is good. It's funny to think of, but yeah. But continuing on point, because yeah, she and 3 troops would arrive and move in to shoot Paul, but with Zoll showing up, and it would be revealed that he was Paul's inside contact and who had helped him to escape. Yeah, it's Zoll. Nice to see. And it's great to see because, yeah, Jason Bateman's character being a good guy and all that, and, having a good friendship with Paul. Not to mention that apparently, according to Zoll, Paul was the one who introduced Zoll to his future wife. That's great to see. Yeah, good on Paul right there. And Zoll, well, he would disarm the 3 troops, but he would be shot in the shoulder by the big guy, as she's called. And each of them would try to take on the big guy from, Clive, Graham, Ruth. Like, she would get on top of the big guy, and Paul trying to go after her too, but, she would kick Paul in the crotch. Then it would all lead to Tara, where, yeah, she punches out the big guy, and after, the big guy took down Ruth, like Tara said, and as she was about to punch her, "Get away from her, you bitch. Just like, hey, and yeah, because taking that line from Aliens. Yeah. I don't think I realized that at first. Oh, well, just one of those things. But anyways. However, Ruth's father, yeah, Moses, he would appear with a shotgun, and, well, I mean, you know, he was like, I'm assuming he was about to shoot Paul and all that, but, you know, Graham, he took the bullet. And Moses would feel bad, and he didn't mean for this to happen, but and Zol, like, he would, you know, tell Moses to back off, and you know, Ruth would tell her dad to put down the effing gun, and it would be up to Paul. Paul would heal Graham, and because he never did this before, he's taking quite the risk, and man, because it took quite a bit of energy out of Paul, and he, the wounds and such from Graham's chest, I mean, that was a big gunshot, and like, just right here, such a big one, right in the chest. And when Paul was healing him, that transferred to Paul's chest. And yep, Graham would come back to life. And yeah, it's a very heartbreaking moment when he dies, and in the hands of both Clive and Ruth. And by this point, Ruth and Graham starting to fall in love with one another. But yeah, again, Paul, he would save the day, rescuing and saving Graham, bringing him back to life, and it seemed like Paul must have died, because he just sits there on the grass, you know, just with a dead face and all that, you know, just not moving, but he would regain consciousness. Okay, it's a good thing he didn't die from that, but it took a lot of energy out of him for a moment. And the big guy, well, regaining consciousness, and is about to open fire on them, but that quickly escalates when a ship crashes on top of her, killing her instantly. Boy, that was a quick demise for the big guy, and good riddance to her. Yep. So, yep, Paul's people have finally arrived, and even Paul's fellow alien people, they heal up the three troopers. So now it seems like everything's good, is on good terms with the three troops that were working with the big guy. Yep. So, you know, them cleaning up the mess, including the big guy's blood and such, and Paul saying goodbye to each of them, you know, of course, from Clive, Graham, Ruth, and Moses. Everything's good with Moses and all that, but just, you know, whatever, because when bringing up God and such, you know, with what Moses specifically says. And in the case of Tara, well, Paul says to Tara that she's coming along with Paul, because, you know, he feels that, you know, she should have a much better new life, you know, restart her life and such, like, for it being a good one. And yeah, this time her being with Paul and his fellow aliens. That's great to see. Yeah, good for Tara. After all she went through, this time a new change of pace in her life. And also, like, yeah, to still speed things up some, because, like, at one point, Paul would make a quote, and by the way, because I can't forget to mention this, because, you know, he resurrected Graham, and, you know, all he could say to Graham is, sometimes you just gotta roll the dice, because, yeah, that would be brought up a couple of times in the film, the whole thing of roll the dice, which, being an idiom, if I'm even saying that right, for taking a risk, and, yeah, that's a good thing right there, and with, you know, them saying roll the dice. Yep. However, like, Paul would, say a quote, and on account of, you know, because with what Clive's gonna do next with writing and such, even like, you know, Clive gave a copy to Paul and his fellow aliens with, you know, and with the cover, the alien with 3 breasts, and in Paul's fellow alien and his alien speech, you know, it translates to, you know, 3 tits, awesome. And, you know, Paul was impressed with Clive's writing and all that, and then Clive would mention, and by quoting, you have to spin a good yarn before you can weave a great dream, which just so happened to come from Adam. Yeah, Adam's shadow child, and Paul just like, you know, that he stole my quote and such, you know, with what he comments on, that Adam, because Adam stole that from Paul. Little did Adam realize. But yeah, the final moments with Paul and the other characters, the human characters, you know, it's a great goodbye, emotional and all that. And yep, the ship departing, however, it's departing a bit slow, and Paul pointing that out, you know? But eventually, yeah, it makes its way back up to the big mothership. Yeah, we see the big mothership departing Earth and such. So, yep. Awesome. And yeah, with what would then happen, and during the end credits, well, 2 years pass, and things couldn't have been better for Clive and Graham. Now they're famous, and with what Clive has now written, a comic book and all that, a novel, based off of their encounter with Paul. Yeah, so them being recognized, and at Comic-Con getting pictures with a group of cosplayers dressed up as slave girl Leia, and yeah, just being presented by Adam Shadowchild at, for their panel, and Adam Shadowchild taking a few moments to talk about himself a little, just, yeah. And, even Ruth being there too, and she's dressed up as Leia in the bounty hunter getup and such, yeah. And she would have an encounter with Pat Stevens, and them talking about, like, Adam Shadowchild and all that, just, like, yeah, it's amusing. But, yeah. Great way for this movie to end off with what came next for our two main human characters, Graham and Clive. Yep, things couldn't have been better than ever. Yeah. And a few photos that are shown, even with what Zuul is up to as of now. Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, that's our humorous, hilarious, potty mouth alien flick. Yeah. Paul, it's so great. I love it. With what it has to offer, everything about Paul from beginning to end is so great. With its comedic humor and having such a big potty mouth, the storyline, great cast of talents from Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, Kristen Wiig, Bill Hader, Jason Bateman, Jane Lynch, and Sigourney Weaver, and of course, Seth Rogen voicing our main titled character, Paul himself, and everybody else that was involved, Jeffrey Tambor, and yeah, the other cast members, to mention a couple of more, like, yeah, George, played by Nelson Asensio, if I even got his last name right, and Valet, played by Bobby Lee, whom we saw very early on in the film, and a couple of others, like, yeah, and also, yeah, John Carroll Lynch, he too was really good as well, and a bunch of others, like, yeah, Mike Miller, who plays a police officer, yeah, he was the police officer that, well, actually, yeah, it was at the restaurant, yeah, that was him, and also the fireworks store clerk, played by Diego Dean, and those that were uncredited, and those that were at Comic-Con, like Robert Amstler, played Comic-Con Conan, okay, a steampunk woman that was played by Donnell Banks, and someone who was cosplaying as Sailor Moon, being played by Dawn Barber, a few stormtroopers that were played by Michael Bender and Corey Drake, Gossiper played by Crystal Ellsworth, Comic-Con nerd played by Devin Farsi, and yeah, but just to name some of the other cast members and all that, yeah. But again, everybody that was involved in this film, great cast of talents. They were fantastic, of course. With what Simon Pegg and Nick Frost brought to the writing, and with this film being directed by Greg Motella, if I got his last name right, the music and score in Paul, that was great too. Some really good visuals, and on account of our main character, the title character himself, Paul, great CG and all that, and everything else that was going on, the funny shenanigans stuff, moments you did not see happening, just like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, and gave you a good laugh here and there. And not just that, the heart and emotion in this film really done well, as need I go on? Yeah, just again, overall, Paul, it's a really funny, enjoyable, entertaining film about an alien, and whom is unlike any other alien we've seen in other movies centering on aliens and with an alien with humans, and where, yeah, in the case of this alien, Paul, he has such a potty mouth and acts like, a human and such. You get what I'm saying? Just like, oh, just so good. Again, I just love Paul, and I'm sure the same goes for you. Yeah, okay, and I'm giving Paul, well, why not? 10 out of 10 stars. Yes, 10 out of 10 stars for Paul. And what about you guys? What did you think of Paul itself? What was your first impression on Paul? Did any of you might have seen it in theaters or when it came out later on DVD and Blu-ray and streaming? If you got a good laugh out of this film from beginning to end with all of its hilarious humor, moments you don't see happening, if you felt the heart and emotion in this, and who were some of your favorite cast members in this film? And of course, on account of Seth Rogen voicing Paul. Favorite lines and quotes here and there, favorite jokes and such, all the references it does, brilliant cameos this film has from Spielberg to Sigourney Weaver, and so on. And just, yeah, and if you enjoy Paul, and if it would be one of your top favorite movies on aliens, and for this being so comedic and over the top, just like, yeah, in a good way, of course, yeah. But just, yeah, need I go on? Just again, overall, what do you think of Paul itself with what all I've had to say, my review, and yeah, what did you think of my review? Leave comments and give this review video a like as always. And so, guys, with all that being said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of Paul. More review videos are coming your way. They're going to be awesome. Keep looking forward, and I will see you guys in the next video/review. And, well, continuing on, reviewing some of my all-time favorite films, one more left. So, stay tuned later tonight because what I will be reviewing next. Now, I really enjoyed this one where, yeah, because you've got a film that stars two great talents, Gosling and Crowe. I'm sure you guys know who I'm talking about, because, yeah, how can you not identify, two great talents by their last names? Just, yeah, but, yeah, again, stay tuned for that. Take care, and peace out. It's probing time.